Chris. It's the Monday show. It's the waiver show. For me, it's a special Monday. I have a new book out. It's called TULSA. You search Christopher Harris Tulsa on Amazon. Sort of post-apocalyptic. I think you might like it. We talked about it on the podcast. Okay, anyway, so waivers. Here's the deal with waivers and me. I'm going to talk week 3. And first, let's talk about players who aren't eligible for my list. And my list tends to be from players who are owned in fewer than 1/3 of Yahoo leagues. But there are certainly players in more shallow leagues who are probably better names than I'm going to give you today that we could quickly, let's just look at a list of guys who I would probably add before anybody I'm going to talk about today, but who are owned in too many leagues by my standard. So Matt Breida, big day for the 49ers. Philip Lindsey, at the very least looking like maybe the head of a platoon with the Broncos. If you're interested in Philip Lindsey's film from week 1, you can go back to this show last week. We were all talking about Lindsey then, and I showed you some film. Sean Jackson. I know, eventually the gravy train probably runs out, but yeah. Ryan Fitzpatrick too, we'll talk about him in a minute. Austin Eckler, I'm somewhat skeptical that this kind of production can continue, but certainly addable. And Keelan Cole, the great Odell Beckham catch, that wasn't too bad. So my idea for this segment is to try to make it as useful to as many people as possible. So people in 10-team fantasy leagues may find some of those guys available on your waiver wire. But for people who play in slightly deeper leagues, that's why I have the 1/3 rule. So I'm going to be focusing more on those guys, and I've got 5 names for you who are owned in fewer than 1/3 of Yahoo leagues. Let's take a look at the list. John Brown is at the top of that list. I'm not sold Joe Flacco is going to be able to sustain multiple good fantasy receivers, but maybe Brown's the one. I already talked about John Brown on last week's show, so you can again go back and see a little bit of film there. Also realize on this list and all these lists, I'm unfortunately having to record this before Monday Night Football, so it's possible these lists get altered by Bears or Seahawks, depending on what happens Monday. You've got Giovani Bernard, Ryan Fitzpatrick I just mentioned, Buck Allen, and Antonio Callaway. Let's talk about all of them. Hey, a quick break to thank BetDSI for sponsoring this week on this YouTube show. You can get deposit matching up to $500 if you use my promo code at betdsi.com, and my code for the YouTube channel is HarrisTube. BetDSI is the place where I play every week. I played there this weekend. It was an okay weekend for me, not as good as week 1, but still pretty good. And I enjoy playing there. I think the biggest compliment that I can pay BetDSI is that I don't really think about it. I go there, I make a wager, I leave, it works, and I'm on to my next thing. BetDSI.com, use that promo code HarrisTube, and they will match your deposit up to $500. Really is where I play. Thanks to them for sponsoring. Let's get back to it. So let's get back into it by starting with the waiver wire rundown after John Brown, because we talked about John Brown. Let's talk about Giovani Bernard, my number 2 ad. As you know, Joe Mixon out for 2 to 4 weeks with a knee scope. Bad news. Certainly on this show, we've loved Joe Mixon. So Bernard gets a crack at a nice workload. So this run last year against the Bears, I think, is illustrative of his best self. He has quicks. You don't see a ton of jump cuts on film from Bernard. He's a good, solid player on the smaller side. But we just mentioned Matt Breida earlier. I mean, if Breida can be a good waiver ad, he's smaller than Bernard is. That can work. Especially on a power pulling play like this one, very alliterative, where they're giving him a place to go, a place to run fast. As you can see, the acceleration is good. He's a good player. These better plays of Gio's, they're mostly going to look the same. I'll show you a few, but he's not Joe Mixon. He just doesn't have that kind of power, and he really doesn't have that kind of side-to-side elusiveness either. And unfortunately, Cincinnati's opponents, starting this week, week 3, against the Panthers, they're going to know that this is Bernard's tendency. You know, the Bengals are going to want to get him out in space. You can see it. He can make the subtle little adjustment to get himself turned upfield, and his feet, they do tend to go fast. Now on this one, yeah, that's what it is. You can see from the end zone view how he gives a nice little fake that, oh, I'm going to cut it upfield, but he doesn't lose speed as he adjusts and goes to the outside, able to get around the edge. Luke Kuechly maybe doesn't fall for this all that often, but I think it does give Gio a chance. So Bernard has his limitations. It's a really good opportunity. Realize also that the Bengals drafted Mark Walton out of the University of Miami, actually kind of a similar player, similarly sized player to Gio, and maybe a little bit more accomplished between the tackles, Then again, we haven't seen him run in a regular season game, so I don't want to say that. Bernard's the one I'd be owning. I'm not thrilled in the long term. I don't imagine it turns out like, say, December did last year. You're going to have a lot of people say, oh, because Bernard had some big numbers in December when Mixon was hurt, he's going to automatically have big numbers now. I'm not there, but if you lost Mixon, I think adding him is a fine idea. He's not a person to blow all your budget on, but whatever, 20% of your fab, if you're a Mixon owner, that's fine. How about some Ryan Fitzpatrick film? I think you probably know what FitzMagic is at this point. I mean, eventually, he has to turn back into a pumpkin. Eventually, right? I mean, this was the first play of Sunday's game against the Eagles. I already mentioned Deshaun Jackson. There he is. And good on you, Ryan Fitzpatrick. The deep safety there, not so good on you. It's just a terribly impossible play. I don't know what he's doing. Deshaun Jackson does the rest after the catch. There's been all these big, long touchdowns. And I don't know what to say. Honestly, it reminds me of what the guy on the other sideline in this game, Nick Foles, did in 2013. Just big play after big play against all logic. Here we go again. It's a nice throw. It's a nice outcut for O.J. Howard. But thanks for playing number 21 there, Ronald Darby. You kind of have to make a play there, dude. Slow the receiver down. Something. You're the last line of defense. And Fitz winds up with another huge play, whatever, 80-yard touchdown, and I'm not sure how much he had to do with it. We've been joking on the podcast that I hate fun, and Fitzpatrick is fun, but just let me remind you what Ryan Fitzpatrick usually is. Against the Cardinals last year, getting blowed out in this game. Don't bother reading the defense. Doesn't matter if there's a safety back there playing center field. I'm sure you can just loft the ball up there and be fine. Oh, whoops, never mind, maybe not so much. I mean, I could go back through the years. Remember how the Jets were going to be really good in 2016? They were going to have a great pass attack. And yes, all the receivers eventually got hurt. But there was also a lot of this. The thing about Ryan Fitzpatrick is he's a crazy person, and he will take shots, and he doesn't really read defenses that much. And when he gets on a roll, that's great. And when he doesn't, so nevertheless, I have Fitzpatrick as my number 3 waiver ad of the week. And what's the logic here? Well, we're before the bye weeks, so maybe you can afford the roster spot. I think, except for maybe in super deep leagues, you didn't believe last week, but maybe it's fine, because maybe we go on some kind of Rich Gannon magic carpet ride where everything goes right all year, and suddenly Ryan Fitzpatrick is the late stage MVP when he'd been a journeyman all his life. Maybe Jameis Winston doesn't get the job back. Maybe. I mean, I have a very deep league where I actually added Fitzpatrick last week because there's nothing on the waiver wire, right? And I didn't use him, and I'm not sure I can even use him this week, but there does come a point where you go, okay, I was too late of an adopter, so let's just stash him and see if the magic carpet ride continues. Everything that I know about football tells me that it won't, but sometimes in fantasy it makes sense to just stash the guy who's unbelievably red hot, and among quarterbacks, who's hotter than Ryan Fitzpatrick. Number 4 on the list was Buck Allen, and honestly, adding Allen is about very little more than exactly this. The Ravens were getting poleaxed by the Bengals 21-0. This was Thursday night last week. They got down to the 1. Well, actually, it was interference in the end zone. And it wasn't Alex Collins in there. It was this joker, Buck Allen. And then, to make matters worse, Troy Aikman says this.
Buck Allen, he is their short yardage goal line guy.
And when I heard that, I thought, he is? Because I don't know if the Ravens told Alex Collins. But listen, if it's going to be on the table that in a week where the Ravens are behind, Buck Allen's going to play, I think, 39 snaps, and Alex Collins going to play 42, and then Buck Allen's going to be the short yardage back, which I don't know if anybody told Aikman that, but it was alarming to hear. If those things are the case, I mean, I think Collins is better, so I'm going to rank Collins higher. But I think I've never been a huge Alex Collins fan, and at the very least, I think I need to start ranking those two players closer together. And then number 5 on the list is Antonio Callaway. I mean, in light of the latest saga, the latest piece of drama in the Josh Gordon saga, in which he's no longer going to be on the Browns, Callaway looks like a starting receiver, certainly at least in 3 receiver sets. And there was some excitement down in New Orleans. This is the splash play we all know about, the play that should have won the game if they don't miss the extra point, the late touchdown Sunday against the Saints. And man, if you want to know whether Antonio Callaway has another gear take a look at that. This is a 4th down desperation heave, and that's Ken Crawley, whom Callaway is running past like he's standing still. And you may not realize this, Ken Crawley ran a 4.43 at his combine. That's not a good play, that's a great play. And of course, Callaway doesn't have anything like Josh Gordon's size, but the Browns need a downfield complement to Jarvis Landry. And listen, when Antonio Callaway is the more stable person when you're comparing people, you probably need more stable people on your team. But when I see this play, I understand the Antonio Callaway appeal. It's also heartening that in his first game as a starter, the Browns just wanted the ball in the kid's hands on occasion. This one's a reverse. Duke Johnson flips it to Callaway, and I'm not trying to tell you he did anything amazing here, but get it in his hands. Okay, I like that the Browns seem to want that. And this one didn't work at all, but again, if we're chasing on the waiver wire opportunity, then seeing opportunities like this hopefully tells us what Cleveland thinks of this kid, which is we think he's fast, which, by the way, I do too. And this one should have set up the game-tying field goal. And let's not oversell anything that's going on here, including this play. At this point, what he is fast. He did connect. I'm not showing you a slant here. He did connect on a nice slant. He had another one where it went off his fingers. Yeah, I mean, it amounted to 3 catches on 5 targets against the Saints, so I'm not overselling it. Rashard Higgins got more looks in that game, but if I'm going to add someone in the search for Josh Gordon's replacement, not going to be Rashard Higgins. It's going to be Antonio Callaway. I'm probably not going to start him. I can't even tell you for sure. I'll have him ranked inside my top 50 receivers for week 3, but if what we're stashing are high upside players who could be stars unexpectedly somewhere down the future, maybe as soon as this year, I think Antonio Callaway's not a terrible ad. All right, I mentioned the book before we go. Tulsa. If you watch the podcast, you already heard me say this, but if you send me sort of a proof of purchase at heyharris@harrisfootball.com, I'll get you in my Sunday morning chats on Facebook. It's a way for you to ask me questions live leading up to the kickoffs on Sunday and watch me answer them. I get to all your questions if you do that. If you want to send me a receipt or maybe even a picture of yourself holding up the book in some compromising position or something, send it to heyharris@harrisfootball.com. Really appreciate your support. Very excited about the book. Thank you for everything, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. Please, please, please smash that like button, write a comment, tell us who else you'd like to see us review film on, and of course, best of all, please subscribe to our channel and then click that little bell above the subscribe button and you'll be notified whenever we post a new video.